Welcome to Real Estate Coaching Radio, starring award-winning real estate coaches and #1 international best-selling authors, Tim and Julie Harris. This is the #1 daily radio show for realtors looking for a no BS, authentic, real-time coaching experience. What's really working in today's market, how to generate more leads, make more money, and have more time for what you love in your life. And now your hosts, Tim and Julie Harris.
Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about how to get buyer agency agreements signed and specifically how to overcome all the objections that you might be hearing. And we're going to be talking obviously about what to say and how to say it. But before we do, I want to thank all of you who have been messaging Julie and I over on Instagram. I appreciate the questions we're getting and the suggestions. And frankly, a lot of you have been thanking us for all the information with regards to these changes that are happening to our industry as pertains to buyer agency. You are certainly welcome. So the way for you to thank us is not just saying thank you, which we certainly appreciate, but remember to give us a 5-star review over on iTunes. That really does make an enormous difference in the number of folks that iTunes and Apple really will expose our podcast to. So please remember to give us a 5-star review over on iTunes. And in the section where they're asking for any comments, it's optional, but do put in specifically why you like the podcast. It really is your way of thanking us. But in the meantime, if you want to message us, of course, with any ideas for the show, do so over on Instagram. And our Instagram handle is, of course, guess what? Yes, you guessed it, Tim and Julie Harris. And that's how you can find us. All right, so Julie, let's jump in. We have gone through, this is an exhaustive long-form podcast, and we're going to be going through almost all the big objections they're going to be hearing. We're going to have to go relatively quick because, unfortunately, your notes are long, which, by the way, if you want our notes from today's podcast, you can get our notes by going to harrisrealestatedaily.com and subscribing to the newsletter. I mean, that in itself is all that needs to be said. So if you want the notes, if you want the actual scripts that we're going to be sharing with you today, please do go over to harrisrealestatedaily.com and subscribe to the free daily newsletter. All right, Julie Harris?
Yes, so on to your buyer representation agreement objection handlers. And Tim just told you how you can get a copy of the notes because there is a lot of scripting today. So after you have met and presented your buyer presentation to your buyer prospect, you'll be closing for the signature on the exclusive buyer rep agreement, your state agency form, and the buyer's net sheet. The following that we're going to discuss, and again, we might not get to all of them today, but we're going to cover a lot of ground, are potential objections a buyer may still have. Now, ideally, you will hear none of these objections because your presentation will have handled everything already, making the close effortless and logical.
But Julie Harris, I don't have a presentation. Well, you will when you become a member of our ethical real estate professional designation, which we'll talk to you guys about a little bit later in today's show.
Exactly. So remember, a close, in this case, closing for the signature, is the logical conclusion of a great presentation. But just in case you hear any objections.
But Julie, it's important that you emphasize why you're saying that, right? It's a logical end to a great presentation, which assumes that you had a great presentation. If you don't have a great presentation, that's when you're going to have to, frankly, you're going to lose that buyer prospect. And if they have a house to sell, you're losing that listing opportunity and all the future business that may have come from you helping those folks, right? So a logical end to a great presentation is them wanting to work with you. You have to have a great presentation. And then after that, what you'll discover is there's no manipulative, overly sales scripts that are going to be necessary to help them to understand the importance of signing an exclusive buyer agency contract with you. I'm going to say that again. There is no underhanded, tricky, salesy
witchcraft and alchemy,
right, approach to basically getting contracts signed. You aren't getting contracts signed if you didn't give them the motivation and the reason to sign the contract with you. So that's the thing. You got to be clear in your head. You're not going to get a listing contract signed. Maybe your mom will sign one without you having presented to her in a presentation, right? But beyond that, if you're competing, a great presentation is going to get the listing contract signed. If you don't have a great presentation and you're competing with someone who does have a great presentation, they're going to win the listing. You're not going to win the listing. Welcome to the new realities of working with buyers. That same logic is going to apply.
That's right. And in the case of the buyer, you may or may not be competing for their business against another buyer's agent. We're going to see that happening more and more prevalently as agents sort their skills out.
Oh, you have a killer point.
But you also are competing against the buyer themselves, going around you, going to the listing agent, going to new construction without you. They're kind of, in a way, your competition.
100%. That's a really good point. Because remember, the buyer agency exclusive contract is going to essentially obligate them to pay you whatever your fee is that is stated on the exclusive buyer agency contract. They, as in the buyer. Now, in the the ethical real estate professional designation, we're going to give you 3 or 4, maybe more different scenarios and how that can be mitigated through concessions from the seller and all the rest of it. In other words, the buyer won't be actually physically paying it in some cases. But the moral of the story is, like never before, they're going to have to sign an exclusive contract stating that when you find me a home and I purchase it, me, Mr. Buyer, Mrs. Buyer, are going to be obligated to pay that buyer agent commission to you. You guys get it? So that's going to be what changes in the buyer agency world, because the buyer agent commission is no longer an entitlement from the seller to the buyer just because you sold the house.
Exactly. Okay, so that buyer prospect may ask you, well, help me understand, why must I sign an exclusive agreement to work with just you? Here's your answer. I'm glad you asked. An exclusive agreement ensures that I can fully dedicate my time and expertise to representing you effectively in achieving your real estate goals. Like other professionals you use, such as your attorney, accountant, or even your dentist, a signed agreement allows us to establish clear expectations and commitments from both sides before we commence our partnership. This ensures you receive the highest level of service and dedication, as well as my exclusive guarantees through our collaboration. And additionally, it's important to note that I'm not compensated until we successfully close a deal, further aligning our interests and ensuring that my focus remains on achieving the best outcome for you. What other questions do you have before you're comfortable moving forward with our commitment to each other? Now, keep in mind.
That was a long script, and you're going to be able to modify that script for your liking. But here's what Julie, I'm sorry for jumping on what you're about to say, because I realized you're about to point out the obvious, that when you use our ethical real estate professional buyer agency presentation, we have already overcome that objection in the presentation for you. And it's actually called
the Buyer Representation Explained. So,
Right.
In other words, follow along with us. Assuming that you presented that page, which would take you 5 minutes or less.
You're going to give them the presentation.
Yes.
The presentation is 14 pages. It's actually more than that, but it's 14 pages. They're going to see it. They're going to pull out the page that basically answers the question as far as, again,
Buyer Representation Explained.
they're going to read the answer to that. They're already going to have the answer to the question they had answered prior to actually meeting with you to get the paperwork signed.
Which means you're not even going to hear the objection.
Exactly. So our presentation is something you're going to give to the client prior to meeting with them, ideally in paper form. We know a lot of you are going to try to do it in digital form too, because it's less work, but don't do it that way. Do it in paper form, because when they have a folder from you with all of this valuable information in it, you have immediately elevated yourself in the eyes of that consumer, because you've gotten something. I'm going to tell you guys a story. I'm going to go a little bit off script here, Julie, so allow me to step away from your outline. Julie and I, when we sold real estate, and we sold thousands and thousands and thousands of homes, we had something called, in those of you in Premier Coaching, long-time coaching clients, you know what I'm talking about. We created something called the pre-listing pack. And our pre-listing pack acted as, I've described it for you correctly, our silent salesperson. So let's say it's Monday. I set the appointment for Wednesday. I'm going to go out and meet with the seller on Wednesday. We've generated the lead. We pre-qualified the lead. The next step after that is to send the pre-listing pack. Inside the pre-listing pack were all the pages that are part of the pre-listing pack. And I think there are 14. And that's still available to all of you, an updated version, obviously, in Premier Coaching. But also we included the listing paperwork. We included all of the agency stuff. We included a sample seller net sheet. We included a long list of questions that if the seller felt obligated to interview any other agents, we gave them questions to use when interviewing any other agents, to like, what's your list to sell price ratio? How long have you been in real estate? How many homes by price range have you sold? Those types of questions. We are doing all of that for you on the buyer side of the transaction. So when you give this to the seller, or you have it delivered to the seller's house prior to meeting with them, and they open that, immediately they're going to be impressed by you. That's going to instantly put you on a different level. Now, how did it work on the listing side of things? It became normal for the pre-listing pack to be delivered to our sellers, and then the sellers would go through it and read it. And then it got to the point where the actual listing appointment was just about picking up the paperwork that they had already signed. You think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. And I remember dozens and dozens of times, not hundreds, but dozens of times, knock, 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 I'm here for our appointment. Seller would open the door, give the listing paperwork back, and they go back to watching Wheel of the Fortune or whatever the hell they were doing.
Exactly.
Right? That's how it worked. And then we would sketch, because they knew the next process was someone was going to come out and take pictures of the house, and there was a list of things to do to get the house. So we didn't actually have to have the appointment. And the times where they did open the door and want us to come in, then it was a 15-minute presentation, because all the questions were already answered that they might ever have for us in the in the normal listing process. In the pre-listing pack is what it's called. They didn't have any questions. We could just focus, and they already knew what we thought the price was because we already gave them a price range from the CMA that we included in that package of information. I'll tell you where, in retrospect, the best appointments. When, Julie and I, if there was an upper end listing, we'd go together. If it was a normal listing, we'd go individually. And eventually we had a listing specialist named Lisa that would go for us. But when you show up in the listing appointment and the seller actually used, I want you to imagine this. There are 15 questions that the seller was supposed to use when interviewing a prospective listing agent. We were going in last. They had interviewed 2 other agents prior to us. And you could see that they used it and actually wrote down the questions from the other agent. And you would see, never did they actually go through all the questions. They go through like maybe 4 or 5 of the questions. And then they just basically stopped asking the other agent questions. Why? Because they realized the other agent didn't know how to answer the questions. Because one of the questions I gave you as an example is, what's your average days in the market? Well, and then we give a little hint. The average days in the market, according to the Columbus Board of Realtors, at the time when Julie and I sold real estate, was 141 days. Our average days in the market varied, but it was usually around like 37 or 41 days, right? So we're telling them what the average is. We're telling them what our average days is. And then when interviewing another agent, if they'd asked the agent, what's your average list or your average days in the market as an example, and the agent didn't know, and the seller knew that the agent was trying to, essentially BS them at the appointment because here's the decoder ring with the actual market statistics, immediately that prospective listing agent essentially unqualified themselves as being essentially the listing agent for them. You see how the silent salesperson did the work for me. That's the reason our listing appointments would last 10 to 15 minutes max, and then we were out.
That's exactly right. And I remember distinctly what a relief it was when we discovered what you just described. So let me just translate this for some of our listeners. Some of them maybe aren't as experienced.
Well, they're not coaching clients, so they don't know.
Or coaching clients, right? Okay, so here's the thing. A lot of stress between agents and your prospects who you're hoping to turn into clients, right? A lot of that stress that and a lot of the reason why maybe you don't call your leads back as fast as you could, maybe you don't have as many leads as you should because you don't maybe prospect, is because you live in this fear of conflict, right? The conflict comes when you're anticipating these objections. That's what we're talking about on today's podcast, objections. An objection is an unanswered question in the mind of the prospect. So when you use a pre-listing package, when you use the buyer package, Ethical Real Estate Professional, you're sending your silent salesperson out before you get there to handle the objections, i.e. unanswered questions in the mind of your prospect, before you get there. I remember what a beautiful discovery that was. That, hey, if I don't have to live in fear of, oh my God, I'm going to present, and they're going to maybe half ignore me because they're hanging on to this question, they're going to throw an objection at me, and then I'm going to feel like I'm in conflict and I got to come up with something, and maybe I don't know the answer, and then I'm going to feel unprofessional, and I'm going to walk away, I might not have the signature. This solves all of this. And it's not just because we say so as podcasters and coaches, it's because we actually lived this. And I remember how much of a relief and how much more smoothly the appointments went. And honestly, how much less time we would spend.
But not just stress for us.
Stress for them.
But stress for the seller, right?
That's right.
Because the seller does not want to confront you any more than you want to be confronted. And the buyer does not want to confront you any more than you want to be confronted. In our opinion, not sending a very organized, very client-focused package of information prior to either a buyer or a listing appointment, now certainly a buyer appointment, basically disqualifies you as being a professional, because you are not actually acting on essentially in the best interest of that prospective buyer or seller. I want you to be really clear. They don't want to meet with you. Especially sellers, they don't want you in their house. They've been working all day. They want to basically follow their evening routine and go to bed, right? They don't want to have the stress of having to ask you, why should I list with you, or will you cut your commission, or all these other things. And if you're getting questions like that on a listing appointment, you're doing it wrong because you didn't send a pre-listing pack.
Well, you should be stressed if that's how you're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the reason that, again, if you want to full circle this, right?
Sure.
That's the reason many agents never become listing agents, because they are fearful of the conflict that inherently comes from a listing appointment where you have not followed our 7-step listing process, where you have not sent a pre-listing pack, because you know damn well when the seller asks you, why should I list with you versus so-and-so, or will you cut your commission? You don't know how to effectively overcome those objections. So what have many of you done? Most of the industry has done, gravitated towards working with buyers. Well, guess what? Those days are over. You're going to have the same level of skill required to get exclusive buyer agency contracts signed. Do not be nervous about that, because like we have for sellers, or like we have with our listing agents, now we've created the same system, very similar system, I should say, on the buyer agent side of the business. We are incredibly excited about it. If you want to get on the list to be, one of the founding members of this new program, which is going to come available in a month or so, text the word buyers, singular, buyer, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372. Text the word buyer, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372. And we're going to put you on the list to become an ethical real estate professional designee. But you've got to be on the list. We're only going to allow 100 agents to join in the next few weeks, and then we're going to close the doors of the program to 30 to 45 days. But we have actually gone through knowing what you're going to be stressed about, knowing what your consumers are going to be stressed about, and we've solved for all of it. This is a turnkey system. You literally just learn what to say and how to say it. Oh, by the way, we might even be doing that for you too. We're essentially developing the technology to make it that if you do send a digital version of the presentation, you're going to be able to have them click on a certain page, and there'll be a pop-up video where probably Julie and me, if not an AI version of us, will then be presenting the importance of that particular page and how it benefits them, right? That's what we're doing for you. Your only, task right now is get on the list so you can be included in this program. Text the word buyer, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372.
That's right. Let me just add one little note here as you were talking. I know some of you listening are thinking to yourselves, well, all my buyer prospects, they're friends and their family and they're like repeat referral clients. I'm not too worried about this. Well, I can appreciate that thought, but here's the problem that we all have. I don't know about you guys, but if you looked at anything in your email, anything in your social media, it is wall-to-wall headlines from the press trying to create question and dispersion about your value. So even if your best friend, who's doing their 3rd transaction with you, knows, loves, and trusts you, you still have the whole media and misinformation and crazy headlines and things working against you.
You still have to have the exclusive buyer agency contract
That's
signed.
right.
And in many markets, this is what Jules is talking about. If you are found to not be following the new guidelines, you will be fined. Your broker will be fined. In some MLSs, if you are caught 3 times, caught with air quotes 3 times, working with buyers without having an exclusive buyer agency contract signed, you could be booted out of the MLS.
And fined.
fined.
That's right. And so even if they are your best friend and you're pretty secure in your relationship, you still need to be presenting the facts to them so that they don't get confused by something else that they read or some other misinformed agent telling them the wrong thing.
You're so in the sort of, I think, traditional mindset. You list homes for sale. You get exclusive listing contracts signed with sellers. Now you're going to get, in essence, a exclusive buyer representation agreement signed with your buyers. You're listing buyers. So those of you who've been listing agents for a long period of time, now I just need you to apply that same way of thinking to working with buyers. And once you do, you're going to realize, especially if you use our ethical real estate professional designation, all the presentation material, the script, the objection handlers, you got nothing to worry about.
Exactly. Okay, now let's get back to some potential objections, which you still might hear from time to time. What if that client says, or that prospect says, what if I want to work with another realtor at the same time? You're going to say, good question. Now, while that might seem like a good idea, working with multiple realtors simultaneously is kind of like trying to drive 2 cars at once. It's not practical, it creates confusion, and it won't get you to your desired destination. Buyer representation agreements are now required countrywide. And I have a little note here in my notes. Make sure you have a hard copy proving that. If you get somebody who's skeptical, it's nice to have in your briefcase or in your phone, right? Okay, now any other buyer's agent you consider working with will also require the exclusive agreement, so it's not just to work with me. This agreement ensures clarity and accountability in our relationship, allowing me to fully commit my time and expertise to serving your needs effectively. See how I'm making it about my job serving their needs effectively. An agent or a broker who doesn't ask for your signature is practicing unethically and is out of compliance with what's required. So it just makes sense to solidify our commitment to each other.
But also, I'll tell you, hearing that objection, you're going to want to ask the buyer why they think that might be an advantage to them. Working with 2 agents at once, even before you get into the weeds with regards to the exclusives, ask them how would working with two or multiple agents be an advantage to you? Well, can I tell you, and they'll say whatever they're going to say. Well, you're an expert in this area and they're an expert in this area. You're going to say, well, I can appreciate that. But can I say, help you understand why that might actually be working against you? And then you're going to have to let them know the disadvantage, knowing in your back pocket, they're going to have to essentially sign an exclusive contract with either you or with the other agent. So you're going to have to earn the right to represent them. And remember what Julie said, and I do believe that was 100% correct. Your biggest competitor, especially after you have, our system in place for the, ethical real estate professional designation, your biggest your competitor is going to be the listing agent. Because what's going to happen is a lot of agents are going to poorly present to prospective buyers the exclusive. We're hearing agents are saying, well, I'm just, sending them a contract and I'm sending them an article to the New York Times saying why now everyone has to get it. Well, did you read the rest of that damn article, which was basically saying buyer agents are just a waste of humanity? Have you actually read what you're sending to your prospective buyers? We're reading all this crap online. You're not going to get the exclusive signed because you're not taking the time to professionally approach them and explain why the benefits are of working with you. And why are you doing it that way? Because you don't have a value proposition, because you're not giving them a reason to want to work exclusively with you, just as if you were a listing agent. Okay, I heard Bob wants to sell his house. I'm going to fax over the listing paperwork and hope for the best. That level of professionalism, if you think you can get away with it in this new world, is not going to fly. So just open your mind to all of this. And I know some of you are listening to what we're saying and you're feeling some stress. And I get it. Don't feel that for too long. Lock into the fact that because this is one of those greatest times of change in our industry, there will be an opportunity for you to essentially be an early adapter and to master the art and science of getting exclusive signed. Again, we've already done all the heavy lifting for you. Get on the list to be first a founding member of Ethical Real Estate Professional. Text the word buyer, BUYER, to 47372. But really, get ready for these types of objections because there's going to be a lot of confusion. A lot of it's going to come from the press, but unfortunately, more of it's going to come from your fellow agents.
That's very true. I've even heard of some agents that their approach to this whole change is this. They're shooting over an email with a dot loop attached with the exclusive agency, and in the subject line says, this is now required. And those same agents are getting frustrated because, those buyer prospects are not just shooting them back their signatures. That's not a plan, guys. Okay, so back to our objections. Maybe the buyer prospect says, well, what if the seller doesn't pay any commission or if it doesn't pay your commission? Am I obliged to pay it? Here's what you can say. As a real estate professional, and Tim, prequel, I'm going to tie it into this, so just give me a second here. Okay, so as a real estate professional, I have a specific fee structure in place. If you're interested in viewing a home where the compensation offered is lower than my fee, I can inform you of that beforehand. I can explain your options and ask how you'd like to proceed. But first, if you decide to make an offer, I'll work diligently to negotiate with the seller to cover my fee entirely as a seller's concession. And this, by the way, is not an unusual request. If the seller refuses to negotiate, I'll consult with you on the next steps. If you still want to purchase the home, you'll be responsible for paying me. But if the seller's compensation falls short of my fee and you still wish to proceed with the purchase, you'll pay me the difference, but it's likely that it can be financed along with the loan.
Okay, so let's stop there because that was a lot. So we're teaching you on this podcast and as a coaching client, but certainly as an ethical real estate professional designee, all the different ways that you can go about getting your buyer agent's commission covered. Julie's about to talk about that. But I want to share with you, Julie, this is something I didn't talk with you about prior to the podcast. We are having coaching clients who are subscribers to 1-800-HOME-HOTLINE.com. Write that down. 1 as in the number, 800-HOME-HOTLINE.com. And these are listing agents. And what they're doing is they're getting a lot of calls from a lot of buyer agents who are asking if the sellers are willing to pay their buyer agent commission as a concession of the real estate transaction.
And how much of it?
Right. And so they're getting too many calls. They're going to be overwhelmed. Listing agents, the firestorm is coming your way. Well, buyer's agents not knowing what to ask or how to ask it or the rest of it, right? So what the smart agents are doing is they're subscribing to 1-800-HOME-HOTLINE.com, and each of their listings gets a specific designation. So I'm going to give you an example. Extension. Yes, sorry. An extension. So each listing that you have, let's say you have 10 listings. The phone number is always the same. Let's say it's 1-800-555-1212. In the first listing, 123 Elm Street, you're going to label that one 001. And then the second listing is going to be 002. Don't overthink what I'm saying. It's this simple. And so when somebody calls asking all the normal information about the house, you're going to be able to let them know. assuming that you're using this primarily for, not for lead generation, but for informing prospective buyer agents about essentially concessions, on the 800 home hotline, you're going to then be able to leave a recording about what concessions, including commission, the seller's open to considering, provided all the other numbers make sense. So all that information you can leave on 800homehotline.com, and then on your MLS or wherever else, on your voicemail on your phone. That's where I would do it, frankly.
I would too.
I would not put it on the MLS,
No.
but on your voicemail on your phone, or even as an email response, wherever they might want to try to find you, you tell them to call that number. And you even give them, for example, you could give them a list in your email of some way of communicating with them, letting them know, obviously, what the 800 home hotline, your own unique 800 home hotline phone number is, with your extension that you have assigned to that particular listing. That will save you from having to take a lot of those phone calls and creating a lot of frustration, because what's going to happen is sellers are going to start shopping you, listing agent. Your sellers are going to start calling to find out how you're communicating with prospective buyers agents, because the market in many markets is slowing down. The buyers are going to the sellers are going to start self-discovering whether or not you're actually being diligent with lead follow-up. You need to put systems in place like this in anticipation that it's going to become more aggressive, not just for buyers, but for sellers. If I went over the head of all of you, I apologize. But for those of you who understood what I just said, you need to go to 1-800-HOMEHOTLINE.com. You need to subscribe to that 800 number. And then for every listing you take going forward, that's where you can kind of put all the, agent-to-agent type comments that used to go to the MLS.
That's right. And I know that mostly resonated with our powerful listing agents who are listening, who are already sick to death of getting those incoming calls. What are you paying? Are you paying compensation? How much is it? Is it a concession or isn't it? How would you like me to do it? Where do I put it in the contract? Okay, you can take care of all of that with what Tim just explained to you. Again, if that's confusing to you at all, become a coaching client so he can help you with that at a higher level. Go to 800 Home Hotline. You can figure it out there as well. But that's a way, and again, I wouldn't put that, in the MLS either. I would put that on your voicemail. You can text those extensions back to an agent asking as well.
Well, you can also make 800 Home Hotline after they hear the information. If you may have already completed a concessions form that's acceptable on behalf of your seller, you could actually then make it so that when they're listening to the recording, they could, I think it's press 1, and then the pre-completed MLS form listing all the concessions the seller's willing to pay for is actually automatically texted back to that buyer's agent. So you've actually written part of the contract for them so they don't have to muddle through and make the whole process painful. You guys get it? So that is something that anyone who's serious about listing homes needs to subscribe to. It's $35 a month. Big deal. 1-800-HOMEHOTLINE.com.
By the way, that's just one more way that powerful listing agents are going to pull away from the rest of the crowd, because they will establish themselves as, for example, somebody who always, bakes in a buyer side commission on their listings or something to that degree, where they get that reputation. Hey, you know what? If I got 5 houses, I know you're good to work with. I just call your 800 number. I get the facts. I know how to write the contract. I'm ready to rumble. So we're getting a little advanced here. All right. So next objection. What if the client, okay, so let me go back to we were talking about compensation is what got us on this. In your ethical real estate professional buyer presentation, you have a page called the flexible compensation plan, where we talk about the different ways that you can be compensated. Okay, so that's part of your presentation. So what if the seller doesn't include it? Well, we can build it in as a concession. What if that doesn't happen? Then we do this. Okay.
The point is, you're going to give them the folder, the presentation, where it's going to answer that question prior to them ever, having to feel conflict with you, asking you how they're going to pay you. Right? You're removing the elephant from the room.
That's right. Okay, so here's an objection. What if they then say, I really just don't feel comfortable signing an agreement like this? Okay, so you can say, I understand and I appreciate your honesty. But when somebody feels hesitant about signing, it often means that there's unanswered questions, otherwise known as objections, or concerns still lingering. Have I missed addressing something important to you, or is there anything specific that you'd like more clarity on? This is you literally asking for additional objections.
And here's what you're going to hear. You're going to hear that maybe you didn't do a great job, or maybe they, didn't fully understand one of the pages from your ethical real estate professional designation presentation folder. It could be you're going to have to review something, or it could be, frankly, they're just already working with 5 other agents and they didn't want to tell you, or they're already talking with a new construction builder up and they didn't want to tell you, or a listing agent and they didn't want to tell you, or they're just not that serious. So when you pre-qualify them, which we're going to teach you how to do, we're going to give you the script, you are going to proactively root out the level of motivation that they have to purchasing a home, financially, emotionally, and otherwise, and also how actually serious they are on transacting. That might mean you end up with fewer leads. Good. You don't want 1,000 leads. You want 10 good ones, 15 good ones? That's what we're going to teach you how to do.
Okay, so
I want to go over this one.
You want to do? Okay.
Yeah, I want to do this one.
There's variations of this, so
That's
make
okay.
sure we cover that.
So, okay, now let's go ahead and do it.
Okay,
All
so
right.
the objection is, I'm just unable or don't want to commit to covering your fee. And this can have a little variation, which is, I totally appreciate what you're doing, Tim. I see the value, but I'm just not comfortable making that financial commitment.
Well, again, this is done for you in the presentation. The other thing they might be thinking, don't want to ask you, is what if I sign this exclusive contract with you and now I'm obligated to work only with you? If I purchase real estate, I'm going to be obligated to pay you the commission. But what if I discover after I've committed to you that I just don't like you or don't want to work with you anymore? Mr. Seller, again, that's going to be something they're thinking. They're not necessarily going to ask you of that, but they're all going to be wondering what happens if they commit themselves to Bob and it turns out Bob's a sociopath. You guys get it? So what you're going to do is you're going to put an easy exit in there. That's version of it. And it's in our exclusive, it's in the, right?
Control and confidence agreement.
Okay, that's what it's called.
Guarantee, sorry.
That's what it's called, the control and confidence guarantee, which means, Mr. Buyer, listen, I appreciate you asking, but we're doing this for you, dear listener. You don't have to worry about this. That's the reason I offer you my control and confidence guarantee. It's all in the presentation. If for any reason you're not 100% satisfied with the services I'm providing, you can fire me with no strings attached. Now, there's going to be carve-outs, and your guys are going to have to decide what those are. For example, if they decide to purchase any of the properties that you expose them to, they're going to still be obligated to pay a commission, things like that. And there might be like a 2-week cooling off period. We're going to present all this to you in the Ethical Real Estate Professional Designation Program. But the moral of the story is just by offering that, do you see how that gives you an immediate advantage in your marketplace where everybody else, all your competitors, are going to be throwing the exclusive in front of the seller, probably going to have 180 days on there, nothing about what happens if I'm not happy, can I fire you? And you're going to be able to present to them the fact that they're always in control and they can always be confident that you're always going to deliver. That in itself gives you an unfair advantage in your marketplace.
Exactly. You can see how much work we have on this, guys, right? All right, so that you didn't have to. All right, here's an objection. What if I just want to work with the listing agent? Let's take that elephant out of the room, okay? Now, that assumes that your state and broker allow dual agency or a version of dual agency or a transactional agency, but let's just call it, what if I want to work with the listing agent?
Okay, before you get into your script, in Canada, we have a great, the number one, John
Walkinshaw.
And he is in
Ontario, Canada.
And he's the number one EXP Realty individual agent in that particular marketplace.
Yep.
So he was explaining to us, I had him on the podcast a couple weeks ago, that in his market, when you sign an exclusive listing contract with him as your listing agent, there actually is something already in the MLS listing paperwork that specifically says that if a buyer shows up that wants to purchase the house with no buyer agent, the commission isn't, I'm just making up numbers, it isn't 3% now, it's going to be 5%. Why? Because I'm now having to do the job of two different agents.
And have the liability of it.
That's exactly right. The liability, the time, the effort, and I'm essentially having to spend, twice doing the job of, like I said, two different agents. So we do believe that that's what's going to happen in the United States in many cases. You're going to see listing agents saying that, essentially let's say a buyer does go to me directly, the commission is now this. That is going to discourage the sellers in many cases from essentially not being willing to offer a concession towards the buyer's agent because they're not saving themselves any money in many cases. Again, we don't believe that sellers are going to care about paying buyer agent commissions as long as the numbers from the net sheet that you give them make sense. They won't care.
You guys are doing net sheets, right?
That's right. I mean, like on our listing presentation, you give them we're doing the same thing for you guys on the buyer side. You're going to give you give the seller a net sheet. And on the net sheet, it's going to give them 3 different options as far as what the house should sell for. Below market, market, and above market. You're going to give them 3 different options. And you're going to write down all the little silly numbers. Some of you do net sheets and you're only putting down 6 different things. Nope. I want them to know what the title insurance costs. I want them to know what the freaking every damn fee costs. I want them to see it all disclosed. The transparency, that's what you're doing. And then you're going to have on there essentially the bottom line. So if it sells for less than market, which it won't, Mr. Seller, I mean, it's a great property, and you're going to paint this wall, and you're going to do some landscaping. So at least it's going to sell in the middle at market price, but it might even sell a little bit above. So in all three of these scenarios, this is the net, and then you circle the net. This is how much you'll make given these three different scenarios. And based on what you told me, because I pre-qualified you, how much money you're going to need to purchase your next home. This will easily cover your expense for purchasing your new home or moving or whatever it is, right? That only happens, those conversations only can happen if you've done the net sheet, if you followed our system. The exact same thing applies to the buyer side now, because everyone has to have exclusive buyer contracts signed. And then when I'm going to flip back to the listing side. Hopefully you guys are keeping up. So on the listing side, in that scenario, you're going to say what the commission is. You're going to write down what you're not just going to put down what your normal rate is. Let's just say, 3%. What you're going to do is you're going to write down 1% for marketing, 1% for negotiating. You're going to show them where you're spending your time and what it's worth, right? And then, they're going to see what their net is. And if they're not going to ask you to cut your commission in that scenario, because they've already agreed that the net from all these different three scenarios is going to be enough for them to accomplish whatever their next goal is. And hopefully that's the case. Same thing is going to work on the buyer side, with the exception of the fact that we're going to show you how to, in many cases, we do believe the sellers are still going to be willing to pay it as a concession. Like, would the seller care about paying a buyer agent commission as a concession if their net was what they needed for it to be in order, for them to accomplish their next move up or move down goal? Of course not. They're not going to care. Does it matter what the buyer agent commission is, as long as the seller nets from the transaction what they need to net? And if, for example, let's say you guys, a lot of people say buyer agent commissions are going to be driven down. Well, I don't think that's true unless the buyer agent is, frankly, not skilled. Because why? Let's say, for example, the purchase price is $500,000. And let's say the seller will not pay the buyer agent commission as a concession. Okay, well, the buyer can finance that as part of their purchase price, so put it on top. So if you're presenting the offer, it's no longer $500. Let's just say it's 3% buyer agent commission. It's now $315. I'm sorry. It's
$300 and $315.
Yeah, right. Right? Did I do that right? No, $309.
Yes, well, if it was $300,000, it'd be $309.
Right.
In other words, you put the 9 on the top, so the seller nets the same as if they had at a full list offer.
They're not going to care whether they take your offer or an offer where the buyer agent was, representing that buyer for $250, doing some sort of discount deal, which everyone's living in fear of, because their net's the same. This is going to take some skill.
Which, by the way, if you guys haven't had to do this kind of thing, but what we're talking about has been done for like 100 years.
A billion years.
A billion years in different ways.
Cavemen
were writing it on with their chisels. That's okay. So I know it might be weird to you, but it's not weird to the market.
This was probably created by the ancient Sumerians.
Probably was. Okay. So back to if I want to work with the listing agent. Well, one way to handle that is you saying, sometimes people think that's a good idea, but it's important to realize that I have extensive training and experience specific to representing buyers. Remember, you're an ethical real estate professional. You have a designation for this.
Before answering the questions, and Julie's not reading this every time, but I'm going to read it too. When they say something, you say, that's interesting. Help me understand why you think that would be an advantage to you. And then listen to what they say. Don't go right into overcoming an objection unless you pull out of them what they say. So if they say, for example, it's very similar to the last script we gave you. I want to work directly with the agent or listing agent. Working directly with the listing agent. Can you help me understand, Mr. Buyer, why that might be an advantage to you? Well, it's because if I go directly to the listing agent, I'm going to be able to,
save a bunch of money,
get the pool table or this or the other thing. They've told you what they think. So don't go in trying to answer questions. Like, those are the things you have to help them understand. Don't go giving an answer that has nothing to do with what they're really fearful of.
Good point.
You have to pull out of them what it is that they're thinking, isolate what they're thinking, and then help them to understand why in most cases it's not true. For example, they're not going to save any money going to the listing agent directly. They might get the pool table, but you can get the pool table for them as well, right? Maybe they have, it's a VA deal and they've got a bunch of closing costs and they think going to the listing agent, it's more likely they'll get the closing costs covered by the seller. You can do the same thing. So do not jump right into objection handling until you find out why they're thinking what they're thinking. What if I want to work directly with a listing agent? I really appreciate that. It's a great question, Bob. Can you help me to understand why you think going to the listing agent directly is an advantage to you?
Conversational, right? It's not any different than when a seller comes in at a higher price and you say, that's interesting. How did you arrive at that price? It's conversational. It's not fire hosey.
But I'll tell you what happens a lot of times when you follow our, frankly, our coaching is it's really, our coaching isn't about sales training. People call us sales trainers, but really not. We're teaching you guys how to be consultants. We're teaching you guys how to essentially be advisors. And we're helping you to understand that you don't have to be a fiery breathing dragon and overcome objections constantly if you've given them a presentation ahead of time that takes the objections out of their mind. And when they say something, they might say, for example, well, I think what if I want to go to the listing agent directly? That's interesting, Mr. Seller. Can you help me understand why going to the listing agent directly, why you think that might be an advantage to you? And then they're going to give you an answer that has nothing to do with what you think they're going to say. It has nothing to do with commission, nothing to do with the pool table, nothing whatsoever. You just, it's because I figured that I would just get the paperwork to the seller faster, or something, right? So don't assume that you know how to read the seller's mind because you don't.
Yeah, don't keep digging, right?
Or the buyer's mind, rather, yeah.
That's right. Now, we also have baked in a final powerful risk reversing close if there's any hesitation. And we used to do this every time, whether they had hesitation or not. And never did anybody actually use this.
We've literally trained hundreds of thousands. I'm not going to say a million because that's exaggeration. Hundreds of thousands of agents how to use all of our scripts because we've been teaching agents to use exclusive buyer agency contract sign since we started coaching in like 2000, 2001 full time.
Yep.
I mean, that's how long we've been teaching agents to use exclusive buyer agency contracts. And all of this stuff works. What we've done with the ethical real estate professional designation is taken everything to the next level because all the rules have changed.
So here is your final powerful risk reversing close. If they still hesitate, or even if they don't, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I even have a home buyer's guarantee. Here's how it works. If after 12 months in your new home, you're not completely happy there, I'll sell it for you for 0 commission. There's absolutely no risk to you, and that's how confident I am that we can work together to achieve your goals.
Actually, that's worded wrong. So within 12 months or within 6 months, not after 12 months, right? So within 12 months.
Yes,
right.
That's within 12 months. You can make it within 6 if you want. I think 12 is fine, whatever you're comfortable with.
I personally would do 180 days. That's what we used to do.
Sure.
Yeah. So if you want to leave it 12, but within 12 months, if you're not 100% satisfied with the home that you bought with me or through me, I'll sell the home for you for free, which means no listing commission. That's all it means, not anything else. All the other fees apply. Yeah. And that's going to be, again, that's a huge risk reversal. Now, Julie and I offered this in the thousands of homes we sold. I don't know if you ever had a coaching client that had, I never have had either.
Nope.
I've never heard of any buyer essentially exercising this guarantee. We've never personally experienced it, but I want you to imagine you're now essentially having to ask the buyer to sign an exclusive buyer agency contract with you, and you're now using even 10% of what we just showed you. Aren't you excited and motivated because you know your competitors aren't going to be operating at that level? Of course you are. So that's what this new market allows for, are the agents that are willing to move to the next, like everyone's going to be operating like what Julie and I have been coaching you guys towards, how we want you to behave professionally. Everyone's going to be forced to go down this road, but humans, especially in the real estate industry, 12 months, 24 months, 36 months. But if you start operating like this now, how much of an advantage are you going to have in the marketplace? What's that going to do to your mindset? What's that going to be doing to your brand or how people perceive you in the marketplace? Oh yeah. And all the people you're going to help and all the cash flow you're going to have as a result.
That's right. And I have to say, because I think a lot of people are hoping that there's some magical changes after August comes and goes. Every single thing in the ethical real estate professional buyer presentation will stand if there are any changes at all.
Well,
this is what everybody should be doing anyway.
We'll update it.
We will update it, but there's nothing that's going to be a radical change. This is how we have taught it forever not because the law changed and you have to do it, but because this protects you as a buyer's agent and it provides an overwhelming value to your buyer clients. I mean, look at it this way. If after using your pre-buyer presentation that we've been talking about, and they look at your resume, they look at your exclusive guarantee, your proven home finding plan where you're not just using the MLS, you've got a control and confidence guarantee, which is basically they can part ways with you as friends. You explain the home buying process. The buyer representation agreement is explained. You've got your guarantees, your communication guarantee. You've got all of these things.
We need to probably update page 14 so that
charity.
Right, but we probably need to update this one, put the charity stuff under resume, and this one needs to drill down on the ratios.
Yes, we can add that.
That's where this page needs to be updated.
Yes.
See, like I said, we're still working on.
I thought about something else too, which might be an optional page. one of the things that you can show, I mean, we've all been through this crazy buyer times where you've had to be competitive and you've had to figure out how to win when it's you versus 10 other offers. Some of you listening have a really killer win ratio with your negotiating. So if that's you and you win 19 times out of 20 because you know how to negotiate on the buyer side,
an offer,
that's a really good USP, and that absolutely shows value. Then I'm going to say, hey, you know what? Maybe I've been around the block with other agents and I was never able to win in a competitive situation, but this agent, okay, yeah, I've got to sign with them, but they've got like a 90% win ratio.
Well, take what Julie just said to the next level. So why would I want to obligate myself to pay the 3% if I'm ending up having to pay it as working with you? Let's just say it's an upper end buyer. They don't care about the 3%, but you still have to show your value or whatever your buyer agent commission will be. Well, it's because if you can show them that based on your experience, your broker's experience, if you don't have enough, your your team's experience, whatever it is, what your ratio is between what the list price was and what you were able to negotiate. Now, I know in many markets it's basically over ask or 100%, but if you happen to be able to prove that I'm thinking of who's the guy we visited when we were in LA and we were driving around the country in 2001. Ben Salem.
Yeah.
So Ben Salem is a fantastic negotiator. He gets business from a lot of very high-end clients because he has really carved out a niche for himself, a great reputation, call it a brand if you'd like, being a great negotiator. And I coached him to do this years and years ago, but he's actually able to prove with closed transactions the difference between what he was actually the final price he was able to get for his buyer versus the list price. That type of information is going to validate your value in the eyes of the consumer. Again, if you don't have these ratios working for you, use your broker, use your team, but disclose it. We're not telling you to do anything antsy. But then also it's going to be, another one is going to be, how long does it take for you on average to find a home for your buyer, right?
Yeah,
everyone's got a nightmare. Oh, this buyer agent, they never found me a home, right? Well, you on average are able to find a house with your buyer, for your buyer within this amount of time. And we're going to give you a page that's going to present all of that and further prove to the prospective client your value. You guys get it? That's the difference. Be excited about this.
Exactly. And along with that comes your client testimonials and all of the other things. So yes, you have got to articulate your value. We are here to help you do that in a stress-free, pain-free way. All you guys have to do is be motivated enough to text the word buyer to 47372 so we can make your lives easier.
That's right. Have a fantastic day. We'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.